Hi, I'm Oliver Gwynn of 173 Tech. I asked you if you'd be curious to find out more about how I put together a data salary review, and you said yes. And so here is what I learned creating a data product. The first thing is start with the end in mind. Now, this is true whether you're creating an external facing data product or doing some sort of internal data initiative. Internally, it's always important to think about who your stakeholders are, what decisions they need to make practically based on the data, and the behaviors you want to encourage. Everything that you extract and model and dashboard or activate needs to be practical to a use case. It's no good extracting everything and then it never gets used. And that's even more important when we think about data products. We really need to consider the audience, who they are, what's interesting to them, the purpose of the product, what you're trying to show, what do you want them to do with the product, and similarly, how do you put that together? So for the data salary review, the audience is data people. Now, we're an agency. We help people to extract, model, and centralize data. And often internal teams, they worry about having an agency in. They worry that we're there to take the jobs. They worry that we're going to land and expand. And although that's not true at all, we always make sure that they can take on the work that we've done. We're just there to make their lives easier. We have a harder time selling to data people. And so the idea of this project was really we needed something more neutral, softer, top of funnel introduction to who we are and what we do. And the purpose is on two fronts. The purpose for them is to help benchmark what they are being paid compared to where they might have in their salaries. Also to benchmark the cost of hiring in-house versus hiring an agency like ourselves. And so it's a commercial piece, not sort of a vanity piece. The product itself, I thought that comparison was really important. I wanted to have a look at people where they are in their career and where should they move, basically based on the kind of industry they're in, the type of job that they've got, and the salary that they should expect, and of course the amount of jobs in one location versus another. Where does the data come from? So I scraped data from 11 different job sites to get the data that's in there. And I chose RPA, which is robotic process automation. And the main reason I chose that is just because it was a technology that I was already very familiar with. I'm already a certified engineer in that particular work. And it's maybe useful and interesting just to say how it's different from a newer agentic approach. And I will just say, as in passing, that I'm seeing a lot of agentic that is actually RPA under the hood. So be a bit careful there. So RPA is rules-based, it's deterministic, it is if-then logic. So if this happens, then do that, basically. Copy this particular piece of text and paste it here. It follows a very fixed script, but the downside of that is it's fragile to UI changes. So if the script that you're trying to put together is that you need to click on the download button and the download button changes from one location to another, then your robot will not work and you'll have to retrain the robot at that point. The other advantage and reasons that I like RPA is that it's very easy to audit and control and see where it does go wrong, and it's good for structured extraction, which is what the main purpose of what I wanted to use it for. Now, agentic AI it's goal-based, it's adaptive, it reasons and it self-corrects, it's resilient to sort of variation, but it's also harder to predict. It's better for ambiguous tasks, in my opinion, at this moment. And it's also a little bit of a black box, and it's harder to then go back and say, well, did it get the data I needed? And so in this use case, I went for RPA versus agentic, but largely, as I say, in honesty, I have more experience with RPA, I'm more comfortable with it, and that's why I chose that technology. The first problem I encountered was data quality. So about 60% of job ads had no salary listed, and most that did have a salary gave a range, so a minimum and a maximum and not a point figure. And that introduced a couple of challenges, which was one is that you're averaging averages. So if the majority of people give you a range, the midpoint is already an average. And when you are averaging those midpoints, you're averaging averages. And there's a statistical trap there that when you compress variances, you can skew the distribution. Don't screw any distributions, guys. But the saving grace is this: is if you collect enough data across enough postings, those errors tend to cancel each other out, and so a central estimate becomes reliable. In a lot of cases where there was no salary listed, I was able to get past salaries listed from Glassdoor. So I actually only ended up with about 20% of jobs that were advertised that had no reference point of that job for that company. And in those cases, I already had averages from everybody else to apply. Problem number two was locations. So not every city had robust enough data. Coverage drove inclusion, not ambition. So yeah, I basically picked 23 locations, and it was largely based on what data was available across the different countries. So I ended up with 6 countries in total and 23 locations within. Obviously, the United Kingdom is where we're based, is where a lot of our clients are based, and the United States were the 2 primary locations that I was interested in. But I also have clients in Germany and France, the Netherlands and Canada. So I wanted to still include those, although there was less locations that had sort of robust enough data. My third problem was, what is a city? What is the boundary marks that I want to apply for my review? I wanted to do tech hubs, basically. New York and London are both good examples. So a lot of job posts will say New York, but they really mean New York State. A lot of jobs will put London, but they actually mean Greater London versus the City of London. And so in a lot of cases, it was better to just do Greater London and Greater New York versus the specific city, because it was nearly impossible to filter out. And my other big outlier was Los Angeles in California. So in Los Angeles, because it's the biggest tech hub in the world, there's a lot of job posts that are really, really high in terms of salary. And I don't think that they're actually going to pay people that. I know it's possible in some cases, but it's really just to try and get any talent through the door and attract people. And then they will normally not give them the real salary, according to Glassdoor, when I compare those two things. And so it was better in that case to use California as a whole state versus Los Angeles in particular. So RPA goes in and it scrapes the data, and then it extracted that into raw Excel file. Nothing fancy is happening there. I will say that's typically not the way I would deal with data. So what we would normally do is we would extract data through an API or through a data source, and then it gets automatically sent to a data warehouse where it's modeled as staging, intermediate, and then production models, and those models are then used for an end dashboard normally. But in this particular case, it went into a raw Excel. Then I went through that modeling process there. So cleaning, deduplication, range parsing, currency normalization, detecting outliers. Normally, this is caught in the modeling stage. AI could assist, but validation logic was more reasonable. So I just basically put a filter on, and if things that looked particularly high, I just had to look at them and thought, is this realistic or not? And then it was all structured in terms of city, role, year, salary, into a consistent schema so that it could then be fed in. And we also have salary by experience range in there. So 0 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, and then 5 years plus. The next stage was designing the interface. And here I made a bad decision in retrospect. So I chose to build something in HTML5 over a dashboard. Now, this is the second year we've done the data salary review. Last year, we did do it in a dashboard. But this year, I wanted to do something a little bit more bespoke. So the reason I picked HTML5 was better analytics. So this is something that is sitting top of funnel. People are not going to log in. They're not necessarily going to give you their email for the data there. I knew that, and so I wanted a way to track what people were looking at, what locations were popular, because it can save me a lot of time next year. So I had better control thanks to GA4 event tracking, but also HTML5 has that built in anyway into the product itself. So I can literally tell what every single journey using our product is. Obviously, there's no users associated with that, but if somebody gives me their email, I can then have a look at what they're looking at, a bit like Big Brother. The next thing is that I wanted it to be branded, 100% branded to us, and not sort of constrained by a dashboarding tool. I'm a visual person. I used to do marketing for 10 years, and I like things to look pretty, and I like them to look consistent, and that's something that is really important to me. And so I wanted to make something that looked really good. I know a lot of our clients are the same way, but often there are limitations inside of dashboard tools. And so I wanted a bespoke UX, basically, built around the product's purpose, and also hosting flexibility. So when it came to capturing people's emails, and I'd just like to say I don't spam anybody's emails. If you do put in an email, it's completely fine. I don't even send you an email or add you to a newsletter. I just want to know who's looking at the thing. So I embedded that into HubSpot, and that link can be really easy to put down, and then I can track people's visitors from there as well, as opposed to having to log into a particular system and build a whole login interface, which I didn't want to do. So the trade-off here was going bespoke means that I had to build everything from scratch, which took more time. my team could have easily built a dashboard in like half a day, and I know that to be true, and probably I could have done that, but I wanted to build something a little bit more bespoke. More control equals more responsibility. So this is a look into the back-end logic that feeds the dashboards, and this is only for one role. So it looks a lot messier than it is. It's actually quite well organized. So each of these different points here represents a screen that you are seeing in HTML5. And then they're all linked together so that when you click on one button, you go to this one and vice versa, and it goes down here. And then they all ladder up to these comparison sites, and those, again, go back here. I'm just going to quickly show you what that looks like in real life. So if you go to our website, it's available for free, all of this. Every single thing that you see here is basically a little, and you can see a pause button there. It's a little video almost. That's the way it's been rendered out. And there's an invisible button that sits on top of this so that when I click head of data, it then takes you to another HTML5 rendered video. If I go home, it goes there, and so on and so forth. And you can see a little bit here about how this is different from a dashboard where you would have one page and you would have filters and all of that kind of stuff, is that I can build my own UX. I can make it as simple as possible. And it was really important to me that I put minimal information up here. I designed it so that look how large everything is that I could probably not get on a dashboard. I really wanted to make it easy to read so that non-technical people could also see this. And it's designed 100% to our branding and, you know, our fonts, our colors, all of that kind of stuff. The other decision I made was just this comparison point of 2020 and 2023. So this is pre and post COVID. But again, I can compare all of these things, and I go down and down on a rabbit hole. And eventually, if I wanted to download something, I can press this button and it will take me to HubSpot. And it takes you to overall ranking. So it takes you to the specific page that you wanted to have a look at. And I can download that if I put it in an email. So the question you're probably wondering is, would I use Lovable next time? Would I use AI next time to build that interface? Because it looks quite troublesome, and it was. Yes is the short answer. I think that AI and Claude and Lovable can build something very, very quickly. I will say that I do have a general worry that if you're building something a little bit more complicated, like there's a lot of different relationships there in terms of how you go back to different pages and all of that kind of stuff, that AI doesn't always get that right. It can take a lot of tokens to get to an end product. You can spend half a day sort of talking with AI, and then it produces something that's not very robust. But by the time I come to this next year, I'll certainly try that. And if I can't get somewhere in a few hours, then fair enough. As I say, my decision to go custom was thinking back towards the purpose. So this is a top of funnel engagement measurement that requires some sort of event level tracking so that I know how many people are looking at it, all of that kind of stuff, which is not currently available through AI as far as I was aware. Let's just do this one again. Now, the question you're probably wondering is, Oliver, that looks like a really painful process, and it was somewhat, but would I use AI next time? Would I use Lovable next time? Probably I would try that. I think that that can get you to something very, very quickly. I will say that for a more complicated product, it's often that you can spend a few days talking to AI and build something that's not very robust, especially where you have complicated relationships and a more complicated UX and UI. There's sort of 5 pages that have to ladder up to each other there in the example that you've just seen. So I would have some doubts about that. And I think I speak to a lot of people where they say they spoke to AI for the entire weekend and realized that they got absolutely nowhere and then were angry with it, which has happened to me myself. I went custom in this particular use case because it was something I was familiar with. And looking back at my use case, I wanted to make sure that I could track those journeys without having any login. And so that was really important to me. I know that I could probably do that if I then add in URLs and bespoke tracking links into my product next time, but that would still require me to sort of think about that logic and build that out and tell AI what to do. But certainly next time I will be trying that. So what are the key lessons I learned by doing that? One is always define the audience and the purpose before a single line of code or scrape runs. That's really, really important, is that you design your tool towards an end outcome. In my case, of course, I could have had those comparisons of places within the tool itself, and I made an active decision that no, they're going to behind. They're going to behind. So what were the key lessons I learned? Number one is define the audience and the purpose before a single line of code is written or before you've scraped any data. Have a really clear vision. It was definitely possible for me to put those comparisons within the tool, but I wanted it to be that you had to give some details, you had to download a file in order to keep any of the data that I'd gotten there so that I could then capture people's interest. I could see who was reading it. I could look at which locations were more popular than next. And so while it was possible for me to build something more robust that required less interface, I didn't want to do that basically. Number two is that data collection is 20% of the work. So designing the scraper was a few days of work, but the main bulk of this and the main bulk of anything is cleaning, structuring, and validating. That is the most important step when we're dealing with any data product. And AI hallucinates, it comes up with the wrong thing quite often. And it's something that I don't fully trust at this moment unless you've got really robust and structured data underneath that. And I can't say this enough, that clean data is its own reward, basically. That's really important if you want to build a data product. Don't assume that you can just ask AI, hey, what the average data salary is, and it will give you the right answer. Probably if it does today, it's because it's reading the data that I've fed into it. Number three, data refresh depends on the end outcome. So as I said earlier, it's completely possible that I can make this as a live dashboard that would pull in the data every single day and tell you how many jobs were posted that day and all that kind of stuff. It would be complicated and costly for us as an agency, which is one of the considerations, but it also depends on the end outcome, as I was saying. So this is something that we want to do year on year. It's a reason for us to get in touch with our data contacts, and hopefully over the years, it's something that we get known for. It's something that people think, oh, the data salary review is out, I'm going to check it out this year, and we get visitors to the site, as opposed to a live product where how often are you realistically going to look at that? And so there is actually an advantage in scraping the data less often in this particular use case. Number four, currency exchange can get complicated, and that also needed an average. So thanks to new presidents, the US dollar was what I decided the currency would be throughout everything, so that the comparison was really easy. And it was so difficult because it was just going up and down, and I didn't know what to take. And I know that this is a one-off data pool, basically, this product. And so I ended up doing some averages over the last year to try and find the right inflection point against different currencies when things were relatively stable to do that. I think maybe what I will do next year is I will have it in the native currency, and then I'll also have it for comparison in dollars as well. Number five, it's okay to choose tools that you are comfortable with. AI is not always the answer. So in this particular use case, I went with RPA and I went with HTML5 because those were tools that I was comfortable with. This was my little project, something I was doing sort of on the side in December. AI can do a lot of good things, but we are a data agency. I needed to really make sure that the data was robust. And I knew that there was faults with the data just because, as I say, it's averaging averages, but that is still better than AI just pulling a number out of thin air, which is a real risk that the numbers would seem really high. I also wanted to say on our page, I do put some of the caveats that we've got in there in terms of the locations, but also in terms of smaller locations where you have a few big employees, the numbers were higher because of that. So if Sony or somebody was advertising a lot in a small location, then it looked higher than the average would probably be. And we put those caveats into the product itself. So it's okay to choose tools that you're comfortable with. Obviously, AI is not always the answer, but it's certainly worth trying because it can get you there a lot faster. Number six, sometimes you want to build limitations in. So I guess this links to number three, which is that this is static data, basically. It's based on a whole year of data, and it's suitable for this particular product. And I built limitations in so that people would then want to download and hopefully give us their email or become interested, and I could see that interest. Sometimes you don't want to build a product that gives everybody everything, and that's really important to think about. Where do you build limitations in? Where do you put in a barrier where you then show interest or you ask for payment? Because when you're building a data product, that's probably one of the hardest questions to answer is, what are people willing to pay for? What data is really useful to them? And so this was my little way of doing that. And certainly next year, if there's some locations where nobody wanted to download that data, I'm probably not going to include them. I hope that this was useful and interesting, and it showed you the way that I built this without using AI. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments below and I'll try and answer them. And thanks very much for watching.